within these markets, they have well-developed supply chains for live or fresh shrimp that is not so much seen that's not seen in international trade. And I think we will hear some interesting examples also from panelists from the second panel. I'll close off with some trends from Japan. The Vannamei market in Japan has been, say, very stable, of around 200,000 tons live shrimp equivalents over the past 4 or 5 years. We do see also that Japan is part of this growth so far in 2025. But on the backdrop for Japan, and one of the challenges that I know Mr. Mori also on the second panel has highlighted in the pre-panel discussions is, of course, the currency ratio, where if you take those developments into consideration for the past 4 years, see that on the global market, Vannamei prices increased by 4%. The price in Japanese yen actually increased by nearly 40%. I hope this can serve as some basis for the discussions later, also in the panels. But I'll close off with some takeaways that we see relevant from Kontali's point of view. Yes, the shrimp industry is indeed seeing a bit of turmoil at the moment, as if that hasn't happened before. But where there are challenges for some, there are always opportunities for others. So also in the marketplace. I want to have kind of 3 takeaways from this session. We should not forget the pivotal role that shrimp really has in expanding seafood as a category, with being one of the species that are really have reached a notable volume globally, and also seeing stronger growth than most of other aquaculture seafood species. Next, market diversification in shrimp is important to achieve this growth. And I think the global shrimp industry needs to put more focus also on developing and surveying other markets than the US market, which kind of has been central for all the market updates that are typically presented and present for the shrimp. But still, we must not forget that the US market is perhaps, say, one of the most developed markets for shrimp. High presence, leading role in both food service and retail. So the US seafood market still needs shrimp, and it needs imported shrimp. Thanks.
Want to put it on the last one? There we go. Good morning. First of all, thanks to George and the team here. Thanks also to our very gracious Indonesian hosts. And thanks to my friends on the panel. I'm Bob Dehaan. I'm from the National Fisheries Institute in Washington. We are, as Travis said, the principal trade association for commercial seafood providers in the United States. I'm very proud to say that on this panel, I have 3 member companies. All great companies. So it's my privilege to talk to you about a topic that maybe some of you have read a little bit about from the United States, and that is the tariff situation and the Trump administration. I thought briefly before we turn to the open conversation, we would talk just a little bit about the basics here. I know there's going to be varying levels of interest or understanding of what the policy looks like and what its implications are. But we could talk about, first of all, the policy. Second, what the trade agreements are that the United States is negotiating with certain countries. involved in the reciprocal trade process, some litigation. It would not be America if we had a policy discussion that did not involve someone suing in the courts. So, and then maybe a little bit about what the Congress's role is. So first off, the policy situation. As people know, the president in April used a law called IEEPA, which I won't bore you with, but just a law that gives the president some authority to impose tariffs or embargoes in time of national emergency to protect the U.S. economy and specifically to protect U.S. producers. And we'll come back around to whether that law is going to hold up for him. And at that time, he imposed a series of reciprocal tariffs that were gauged on a number of different factors, but principally the amount of the goods trade deficit that the given country has with my country. Those numbers ranged from a 10% baseline number all the way up to, gosh, I think 60s for countries around the world, and specifically for 60 countries around the world. There has been a question all along about what the purpose of the tariff is. And the principal choices there are whether the tariff is meant to be protection for U.S. producers that would encourage them to encourage our companies and investors from outside the U.S. to insource jobs, and especially manufacturing jobs, into the United States of all kinds. Or the second choice is the tariff a point of leverage to get a better deal and better rules of the road out of a trading partner than have existed heretofore? And the answer to the question of which one of those is kind of yes. And by that, I mean, it's kind of both. Now, the reciprocal tariffs have emerged as leverage, and the 10% baseline number has emerged as a safeguard, what American trade lawyers would call a safeguard. But it's not even clear entirely that all the reciprocal tariffs will go away in the event of a deal. Our Secretary of Commerce, Howard Lutnick, said at a hearing 2 weeks ago that with respect to Vietnam specifically, that he would not necessarily take all of the tariffs on Vietnam, which is 46%, down to 10% in the event of a deal, which if you are one of the producers in countries like Indonesia, Vietnam, et cetera, that's negotiating with the United States, should be an alarming statement. Because the theory is of the case, if you give our exporters better access to your country and in terms of tariff and non-tariff barriers, the United States will then eliminate all but the 10% baseline tariff for you. If the government is not going to do that, then that raises the question of whether there's enough of what we would call a sweetener at the end of the deal for countries in order to cut a deal. Having said that, the negotiations in these agreements are going on rapidly. The president was going, the idea of the pause, we call it the pause, from early April to July 8, was to give countries space to work with the United States government and come to an agreement in a bilateral forum. The president really likes bilateral. He likes to talk to one country at a time, pardon me, to come to bilateral agreements that will address longstanding U.S. Complaints of tariff and non-tariff barriers for U.S. goods exporters. And by the way, this is almost entirely goods exports. You will not hear the president or anybody in his team talk about services, digital, consulting, insurance. There, the U.S., it must be noted, is a dominant player in the Pacific Rim as well as in Europe. But these are all goods deals. And the deals are they are talking with roughly 36 countries, 34. Most major seafood suppliers to the U.S. are involved in talks with the U.S. trade representative in Washington, which makes this process incredibly important for our companies and for you. These are narrowly scoped deals. There's not going to be an environmental chapter. There isn't going to be typically a labor chapter, a foreign investment chapter. It's really just focused on tariff and non-tariff barriers. So if you're a US chicken producer and you're washing the broiler in chlorine, which is done by US producers, we have tried to get that product into the European Union for 30 years, and they will not allow it. So that's the kind of non-tariff barrier that we're talking about. And of course, the US wants countries to go to zero duty or something close to it in order to even the playing field, as they would put it, between the producers of the two countries. These deals are coming together, but I don't think that many of these deals will happen in the next 2 weeks, which means a major question for you day to day is, do I push all the product I can through the US so that before July 8, or do I wait to see what happens? There is a major question in the United States about whether countries will get an extension. Would it all be one extension for every single country that got a reciprocal number? Would it be case by case? Will they say, nope, you got to keep talking to us, but we're going to raise your tariff to 36%, whatever, 46%. Those are open questions. We think that the logic of this is that the administration will have to extend relief to countries when they are talking in good faith, because it's awfully hard politically to deal with a foreign trade partner in a negotiation when you're sticking that person with a very high tariff. So our expectation would be that for those countries that are working in good faith, and I would count Indonesia as one of them, there's going to be an extension of time to give the negotiators the space to come to a deal. That doesn't begin to get at the complexity of negotiating with what you would say are the very, very large trade partners of the US, like the EU and China, maybe India. There, the complication is it's so hard to get the two governments to just grind through the detail that they're going to blow well past the summer in these agreements. However, there are going to be some deals. We might get one or two before July 8, and then we think that there's the potential for an extension of time on the reciprocal tariff to give the other country time to come to a deal with the United States. Again, as I said, it would not be America if we didn't talk about the courts. This is not necessarily the best reported thing, I think, around the Pacific Rim, but a US court, a specialized court in New York, held a few weeks ago that the president's legal path for the tariff is unconstitutional and illegal, and immediately put an injunction on the administration, on the government, from collecting the tariffs, any of the tariffs, reciprocal, 10%, whatever. All of that got blown up by this court. The government, which has a lot of lawyers, then immediately appealed to an appellate court, and that court has stayed or paused the impact of that initial ruling, which means that for now, you still have to pay whatever the applicable number is, which is 10% for most countries. But that is a threat to the administration's ability to execute this policy. In our system, the Congress is actually supposed to be imposing tariffs, but the president has acted under a very, very, very strong law to take action without congressional input. And we will see what happens with that case. There is an argument, oral argument, a hearing, if you will, in this appellate court on July 31st. So you can be relatively confident as you can be in this circumstance, that until the end of July and into the first week of August, you won't see any legal change here. If the president and his team, if the United States government loses in this court, there will be an enormous amount of disruption because the tariff will go out of existence, and then our customs service will have to refund all the tariffs back to people, back retroactively until August 2. So that would be good news for free traders, but it's terrible news for the supply chain logistics people, because this is a massive thing going on. The last thing I would say before turning it back to Travis is that the Congress, I've been at this for 7 years with this blob of tariffs. We started this in the first Trump administration on China. And I don't think at any time has the Congress materially impacted the course of the policy. When President Biden, who was a Democrat, was in office, the Democrats did not want to disturb his tariff policy. And when President Trump is in office, Republicans in the Congress, the conservative side, don't want to mess with their guys' policy. So even though there are plenty of free traders in our Congress, the Congress is essentially neutered in this situation. So it's the executive branch and the judicial branch of our country that will make the call on this. There's a ton more to talk about here in terms of the rationale the president has, in terms of some of the details of what will happen later this summer. But I hope that gives you a survey of what the current landscape is on these issues. Thank you.
Thank you, Bob. I appreciate that. I've known Bob for a long time, and he warned me that he could go long, and trust me, Bob can go long, but he did great today. Let's see. Can we go back? There we go. I just wanted to make a quick introduction. We have Eric Bloom from Eastern Fish. Pretty good up there, Eric. This information is also in your app. You can take a look at the folks that are with us. Eric's been a friendly competitor, very good friend of mine for many, many years, so I appreciate him being here with us. And Matt Livesay from Red Lobster. Many of you have worked with Red Lobster through the years, and it's great to have Matt here with us as well. So let's go ahead and talk about tech people. You can put whatever you want up here, I guess, because we don't have any more slides for now. By the way, this video board is about 1,000 degrees. Don't you guys with the coats wish you dressed like I did? I knew it. All right. Bob, thanks for the update. So let's talk, guys, about what's going on in the U.S. market. Matt, start us off here. Looking at what Bob just said, what does every minute of your life feel like now with all of this in mind?
Right. A couple of things I wanted to reiterate that I heard earlier in Ragnar's presentation is that the U.S., will continue to be a huge market for shrimp and needs shrimp as a big component of our seafood consumption. So that's something that will be grounded within our business. Secondarily, I joked with Travis during our call earlier that our board has essentially made fun of me that my job now is to watch Newsmax, which for those of you that aren't familiar with Newsmax, it's a conservative media outlet in the U.S. that highly aligns with Trump's policies and statements. So, and that's, half joking about Liberation Day tariffs and how that's implicated our business. Speaking on behalf of food service and restaurants in the U.S., it's historically a low margin business, right? It's a volume driven business. And so we're looking for value, and we're also heavily looking into contingency planning right now as an outcome of the actions that have been taken around Liberation Day tariff policies. Among the portfolio of items that we leverage in our space, shrimp versus crab versus lobster and certain finfish still represents a strong value component, and even against land-based proteins, still very, very highly valued. So, I think it's important for us to understand the dynamics of how the sourcing equation is going to continue to evolve. If we get pressure for inflation in shrimp and other seafood species, it's going to create pressure on our consumer. It's very hard for us to pass along high levels of pricing increases. There's not a highly elastic market for our consumer. So we have to find ways to mitigate that, whether it's through the portfolio or whether it's through how we leverage shrimp as a center of the plate component versus maybe a more complementary component. So all that is to say, it's a very dynamic situation right now for us in food service. I think my company, Red Lobster, has a unique position in that we are so highly focused on
Try another one. There we go.
Yeah, okay, we're back.